Hello, I'm Cameron Sabet, and welcome to Cutting to the Case. Today we're joined by Dr. Terry Hart, former NASA astronaut, retired Air Force fighter pilot, and telecommunications executive, who now teaches aerospace engineering at his alma mater, Lehigh University. He earned his BS in mechanical engineering from Lehigh in 1968, followed by master's degrees from MIT and Rutgers. After starting his career at Bell Labs, he flew over 3,200 hours in high-performance fighters during a four-year Air Force leave of absence, eventually retiring as a lieutenant colonel in the Air National Guard. Thank you for your service. NASA selected Hart as an astronaut candidate in 1978. In 1984, he flew aboard Space Shuttle Challenger STS-41C, where he performed the first orbital rendezvous of the shuttle program, operated the robotic arm to capture and enable repair of the Solar Maximum satellite, the first ever in-orbit satellite repair, and filmed sequences for the IMAX film The Dream is Alive. After NASA, Hart returned to a business career, eventually becoming president of Laurel Skynet, overseeing satellite operations for AT&T's and then Laurel's satellite division before retiring in 2006. He's now a full professor teaching of mechanical engineering and mechanics and directs Lehigh's interdisciplinary master's program in aerospace and space systems. He remains an active FAA certified flight instructor and researches spacecraft dynamics and control. I'm sure your students are very lucky to have you. Thank you very much for joining.
No, thank you, Cameron. I'm lucky to have them. We just have great students to teach these days. It's so much fun.
Yes, of course, of course. So I'd like to start out with the question that's on everyone's minds, which is on your astronaut experience. You performed the first ever in-orbit satellite repair on the Solar Max mission. Can you walk us through the moment you realized the capture wasn't going to plan and how the team improvised?
Yeah, we had trained for 2 years with a lot of help from the engineers at the Goddard Space Flight Center, NASA Goddard, to fix their satellite, which had been spinning out of control for 4 years by the time we got there. So we wanted to fix that so the scientists could study the sun more, with that satellite. And unfortunately, when my crewmate George Nelson, who we call Pinky, tried to dock to the satellite, the docking adapter malfunctioned, and he banged into the satellite and it was tumbling kind of out of control. So we kind of had a mess. Fortunately, we got Pinky back on board because he was out there untethered. He was on a manned maneuvering unit back in the day. But with the help from the Goddard engineers, we got the tumbling slowed down a little bit so I could grab it with the mechanical arm. And then we fixed it and put it back into space. So it was a real nice highlight of the early space shuttle program that showed what we could do in space.
Absolutely. That's incredible. And these often bring up questions of risk as well. What is space flight and doing these high risk maneuvers do to a person's understanding of risk that no ground-based training can replicate?
Yeah, well, it's all about managing risk. I mean, we all have risk in our lives every day. You can climb in your car and go somewhere. You're always taking risks. So we try to focus on the things that are that we can fix. The things that can cause problems in a mission. And we spend probably 95% of our training at NASA trying to overcome problems that develop and minimize those risks. So by the time you get ready to fly, you feel pretty good about everything that's been done, and you just want to focus on your job, getting your job done, so you don't disappoint the rest of the team.
Of course, of course. Yes. And what does you filmed sequences for The Dream is Alive while you were in orbit.
Mhm.
How did operating an IMAX camera change how you experienced the mission versus your crewmates?
Yeah, well, we were the first crew to fly the IMAX camera, and it was an interesting training exercise because it was so heavy and so big that on the ground it was actually fairly hard to operate to change the film canisters out inside a big black bag.
Mhm.
But we found that once we got in space, it was actually easier because of the weightlessness. We could do the job, much easier. So it would end up being a fairly straightforward process.
Hmm. Wow. And yeah, that's fascinating. And what's a moment then from because you're mentioning a lot of kind of unexpected things that happened while you were up there. What's a moment from Challenger's STS-41C flight that never makes it into official mission summaries but stuck with you personally?
Yeah, of course, the highlights, people leak out or not leak out. NASA talks about them, of course. But one of the incidents, we're talking about the IMAX camera, it was a lot of inertia when you spun up the film. And
Wow.
yeah, so I grabbed it. And the very first time I went to use it, it was like a pistol grip. You squeeze the trigger, and the film started to spin this way, and I started to spin that way. I didn't think ahead, about angular momentum and everything like a ice skater. So I thought, oh, yeah, dummy. And then I stopped the film right away, found a little toe loop where I could stick my foot in under a piece of duct tape and
Oh
get
my goodness.
anchored and start the camera up, again, so it worked much better that time.
Wow. Wow. And you have a lot of experience with angular momentum being in fighter planes as well.
That's right.
You logged 3,200 plus hours in high performance fighters. So much so that I recall your astronaut classmates were kind of jealous a bit that they were in the trainers and you were in the F4s. What specific habits from fighter cockpit decision making carried over most directly into the astronaut corps?
Yeah, I think fighter pilots, all pilots have to be trained, of course, to plan ahead, recognize, be organized, do all the things you need to do, critical thinking in the general terms. But in the pilot world, we call it situational awareness is the term that we generally use.
Yes.
And yes, that's true of any pilot, but particularly fighter pilots, because things happen so much faster, in a fighter cockpit. And all those things carry over, very nicely to NASA, to astronaut training, where you're also maybe not spring loaded for real good decisions, but still timely. You have to be thinking ahead and understanding your environment and what all the other people around you are doing. What's going on in mission control. How you can use them to help you. All those kind of things are very much pilot kind of skills that we learn that carry over very nicely into space.
Absolutely. And that also kind of carries into those split second irreversible decisions that you were mentioning. How do you teach that instinct to engineering students, for instance, who've never faced real-time pressure?
Yeah, I don't think we try too hard to do that. I guess almost the other way around with engineers, you want them to be more circumspect, take their time, get a lot of other opinions,
Yes.
maybe do more analysis. And if you're not sure, you find another way to analyze the problem. All those
Yeah.
different ways of looking at things. It's really a different culture than flying. And of course, the right answer is a little bit of both, when
Yeah.
you're trying to conduct a mission, you want to, be able to think in the long term, but also, react to problems quickly if they end up deteriorating, the mission.
Yeah, yeah. And you went from astronaut back to corporate engineering management, eventually running a satellite communications company. What was the hardest adjustment then, moving from flying the mission to managing the P&L?
Yeah, it was a leadership challenge, and of course, I had leadership experiences in the military before. But fortunately, I had a really good team of people. I was the head of engineering, but my colleagues at the time were running marketing and sales and human resources and all the other disciplines of operations that we had. And we, as a whole unit, AT&T sold us and I became the president at that point. So I was so lucky that I had a team already built basically when we left AT&T. So it was a wonderful learning experience. Yeah, for 7 years I was in the business world then, which I hadn't been trained too well for, but I had certainly had a good team around me, and we did really well. We grew that business from about 50 or 60 million when we left 18 to almost 500 million. And then Loral sold the business to Intelsat. So all the satellites we built over that 7 year period are up there operating still. For Intelsat.
Wow. Wow. And
Mhm.
what did what did this all teach you about satellite business economics that your NASA experience hadn't prepared you for? I want to kind of push more deeply into that.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
so-called business model for satellite communications is really an interesting one. Because you can build a satellite for about the 100 million to build a satellite, big communication satellite, another 100 million for the rocket and to launch it, and then maybe like 50 million for the insurance to get started and for the first few years. Yeah, so roughly 250 million in. But if you sell that out to high-end customers like our customers were CBS, PBS, ABC, and Fox. We had four out of the five major networks on our satellites. So we really had a good base. In other words, it was sold out when we launched it. The profitability of that business is extremely good, so because you own the orbital slot, those locations over the equator, where all these dishes are pointed, that makes the slots very valuable. So it was a wonderful business to be in, and we did real well.
I mean, no kidding. And AT&T sold its satellite division to Laurel in the middle
Yeah.
of your career there. What
Yeah.
does it teach a leader to have your division's ownership change out from under you?
Well, it was interesting because Bernard Schwartz was the CEO of L'Oreal at that time.
Mhm.
He's a wonderful man. He passed away just a couple of years ago.
Oh,
But
I'm
but
so,
he had a business model with another gentleman named Frank Lanza, where they would go in. They were a defense operation company, but they would go into companies like AT&T, IBM, Ford Aerospace, and they would buy divisions that were focused on defense and space that weren't part of the main business, and then they would bring them in a way that they would support them, better than they were supported by the parent company. It was really a good business model, and what they did was not try to impose their culture on you. They assumed that you had a successful culture coming from your parent company, and you should maintain that and enhance it. So it was really an interesting world to be in for those years.
yes, absolutely. And you know, you also hold patents from your early Bell Labs work in noise suppression and safety devices. How did that early hands-on engineering shape your instincts as an executive later on?
Yeah, any engineer likes to be hands-on. I mean, we were all about building things. From the time I was a toddler, I wanted to take things apart and figure out how they worked. So I had a chance to do that young in my career. And as I moved on into more management and leadership positions, I kind of lost a lot of that hands-on technical work that I love so much. And one of the fascinations, Cameron, when I retired then and came to teaching, was I could redo all those skills. I could freshen up my calculus and all the other things I needed to teach. And now I can bring those experiences to my students and watch them, do more of the hands-on things. And then, our students are wonderful. Our aerospace students launch rockets and build spacecraft for NASA to take up to the space station, and all kinds of things going on. They're very hands-on, and I get to watch them do that now.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
And those kind of principles come back. A lot of your
Mhm.
students, I'm sure, are also hoping to get into the aerospace industry and
Mhm.
specifically like eventually become an astronaut potentially. Um, you know, NASA missions and those satellite operations are both very unforgiving of small errors.
Mhm.
What's like a leadership principle that applies identically in a shuttle cockpit in a boardroom?
Yeah, I think two things: attention to detail,
Mhm.
which engineers should always do anyways, but maybe even more importantly, a good sense of teamwork.
Mm.
Because everything we do anymore, especially in space, it's all very interdisciplinary. We need mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, we need computer scientists, we need programmers, we need the scientists with their instruments, and all these things have to come together and work on a design where you have to keep the weight down because it has to fly on top of a rocket. And it might take 4 years to get to that point where you design and build that satellite. And for 20 minutes, it's going to shake, rattle, and roll on top of a rocket. And then for the next 20 years, it has to operate in space without anyone touching it, ideally. So it's a great challenge, and you need that sense of teamwork so that everyone shares their problems and overcomes them together. So you have a really good design, and you build it in a way that is reliable.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
And how did commanding attention and trust as a mission specialist differ from earning it as a corporate president?
Yeah, well, it's a different leadership position. When you're a crew member, your commander. In my case, I had the pleasure of having Bob Crippen, the pilot on the very first shuttle, was our commander on our mission. And we had a great team. Dick Scobie, who sadly we lost Dick a couple years later in the Challenger, and then Pinky and Ox, our two spacewalkers, and myself. We had quite a good team. So you learn a lot about leadership by watching the people that are leading you, and then you take those lessons with you when you have a chance then in industry, you share that experience and use some of those same leadership skills to motivate and focus your team, just like you learned in the military or at NASA or wherever. It's a great learning ground.
Yeah, yeah. And what's maybe a failure that you can share, professional or technical, that shaped your leadership style more than any of your successes?
Yeah, I think one of the strangest quirks. So I was at Bell Labs, and this is in between before I went or right after I got back from NASA. One of my first assignments before I started running the satellite division, we were doing some secure work for the government and software, and we were trying to build a secure version of the Unix operating system, for the NSA to use in their computers in the basement there at Fort Meade. And so AT&T was promoting that, and the software was a critical point. So I had a team of engineers that I was leading, and they were all software people. And at first, I didn't appreciate the differences between regular hardware engineers, electrical, mechanical, whatever, and software engineers, because most engineers come in, 7 o'clock in the morning, they work till 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and they're ready to go home for dinner. Software engineers, they may come strolling in at noon or so. They'll work till 2 in the morning. It's a totally different culture among software engineers as opposed to hardware. And so I saw that, and I said, well, do I try to do something different? Do I try to make them work from here instead of from home, or work it during the day instead of at midnight or whatever? I said, no, I'm not going to change the culture. I'm going to go with the culture that's there because they were good. They were doing their work. So I adjusted, to their way of working, for that it was a year and a half roughly that I was in that mode. And I learned a lot, about other ways to solve problems, software problems as opposed to hardware.
Yeah, yeah. And now you're training the next generation of aerospace engineers across all these interdisciplinary aspects that
Yeah,
involve it in the same building where you once studied. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
what's the biggest misconception young engineers have about what it actually takes to work in space systems?
Yeah, I think most engineers coming out of college, they're mechanical, they're electrical, they're computer science, they're focused on their disciplines mostly. But one of the key disciplines that's required in all industries anymore, but particularly in aerospace, is systems engineering. So a system engineer's got to know a little bit about everything, right? He or she's kind of like the umpire on the team, where all the other engineers are designing propulsion, communications, the structure of the spacecraft or whatever. All those engineers have to work together, and the leader, is the system engineer. And that's something we try to teach a little bit, at the undergraduate level, but it's really at the graduate level more. And then when you get into industry, yes, some of the typical career path will be to become a system engineer, 5 or 10 years into your career after you do propulsion or something like that. Yeah, but those skills are very much leadership and teamwork. You don't have to know all the details of every system, but you kind of have to know how to bring the whole thing together, to make the satellite work right and fit on top of the rocket and so forth. Yeah, so that kind of interdisciplinary it's so important, not just in aerospace now, but in all fields that require more than just one kind of engineering.
Absolutely. And it's so exciting to see. I mean, this is why we host this podcast is to
Yeah.
introduce students to how interconnected all the fields are. I mean, people think of, for instance, in medicine, a lot of my
Mhm.
classmates, they're thinking, oh, I want to be a neurosurgeon or a cardiothoracic surgeon. And some of my other classmates are saying, wait a minute, there's so many other avenues that you can branch out and you can go and, you know, advise large corporations on how to, navigate the intricacies of healthcare. Because right now it's a bunch of MBAs, leading it, and they don't know
Yeah.
what's going on with,
Right. Right.
ordering lab tests, and they're like, "What is this? We don't need that." Well,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
you do clinically. So, you know,
It's real,
yeah,
really
yeah,
important. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's
it's
there's not an interesting parallel. You may not have studied this in med school yet, but we have a thing in flying, particularly in bigger airplanes with a pilot and a co-pilot,
Mhm.
called crew resource management. It's how you work together with your co-pilot, especially when things are not going well. There's an emergency or a problem like that. And what the medical profession has found is that those skills and those procedures that we use in the cockpits are very much applicable to operating rooms, and how the team works together, the nurses and the doctors in an operating room. And even beyond that, that we found that, for example, when a pilot makes a mistake, you're flying, the controller tells you to climb to 10,000 and you go to 11,000. So right away you made a mistake, so maybe you jump back down to 10 before he catches you, but what we've trained pilots to do now is to report yourself. And
Mm.
NASA does that actually. Within 24 hours, if you admit that you've made a mistake, then you won't lose your license. You may have some extra training to do or whatever. But that kind of application of self-confessing makes flying safer. The medical community now saying that's a great idea. We need people in medicine when they make a mistake, a nurse, a doctor, whatever. Don't try to cover it up because no one will learn from it. Let's find a way to safely let people report. You won't get in trouble, but you have to report it. If you don't report it, and then people find out, and now you're in trouble. So that kind of culture between the two industries is a very important one, I think, where we're learning from each other about how to do things safer and better.
Yes, yes. And actually, I was speaking with the chief financial officer of Mayo Clinic and also of Georgetown, and they
Yeah,
both implemented a report first approach where if
right. Yeah,
there's some kind of mistake in medical care as well, they report it directly to the patient. The surgeon comes in, the neurosurgeon, and says, "Look, I made a mistake. I did this," and
yeah,
they come clean. And they found that it reduces the amount of lawsuits significantly. And
yeah,
so it's so paradoxical, and a lot of surgeons were scared to kind of fall into this, but
yeah.
they realized it's so helpful.
Oh, very helpful. And what it does is it identifies trends before people get hurt. And you can see that people are starting to make mistakes in one particular area,
Mhm.
in one part of the hospital or one particular kind of procedure that it's not going well. You get some warning so you can intervene and make it safer before something bad happens.
Yes, yes. And that's also a growing part of our United States medical licensing examination, step two, that I'm preparing for. A lot of it's on quality control and how
Yeah.
to, reporting guidelines and, back tests on what went wrong in a hospital error incident and submitting forms. It's fascinating how that kind of collides with the
Yeah.
space world.
That's
Um,
great. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I am very curious. You went, um, what is a problem in the field then, given all of this, that excites you most right now? Spacecraft dynamics and trajectory optimization are obviously your current research focus. I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you could maybe share with the audience, inspire their curiosity a bit.
Well, yeah, at a technical level, what's going on right now, most people are kind of aware of it. Uh, Traditionally, the Department of Defense and NASA and other uh, agencies around the world have built these really big, powerful, multi-billion dollar satellites, like the Webb telescope, $11 billion satellites. And sometimes you have to do that. In the case of Webb, you have to do that.
Mhm.
But more and more, we're finding that you can be more robust and with a constellation of satellites, smaller, less expensive satellites, but more of them, all reporting either Earth observation data, for example, or in the case of DoD, that could be communications or it could be some kind of sensing, somewhere around the world. You're not as vulnerable if you have a whole lot of satellites. And Starlink, in fact, we're talking right now over the Starlink constellation. I have my Wi-Fi on Starlink. That's 9,000 satellites are up there now, and my voice goes up from my local antenna here, and then it goes zap, zap, zap across a bunch of satellites, and then back down again, to where you are. So that kind of dispersed constellation is more powerful now, but it's also a challenge because we have to avoid these satellites from running into each other, and there's a whole thing about optimization. What's the right number of satellites and how do they repair each other when some start to fail? There's a whole bunch of new kinds of problems that come up, but it's a good way to go because we were so vulnerable with the really big satellites. If one of them were to fail, it takes away so much capability. So that's a big challenge for the industry.
And a very fascinating question, kind of on the industry's hands as well.
Yeah.
Um, Now, if you were selecting astronaut candidates today, the way NASA selected you in 1978, what would you be looking for now that wasn't emphasized back then?
Yeah, I think actually let me go back a little further because during Apollo and Gemini and Mercury, before that, the original astronauts that NASA were hiring were almost all test pilots. A few scientists came in, late in the Apollo program, and they were all very strong personalities, overachievers, and focused people. There were some problems managing them sometimes, and there were some issues back during Apollo that I won't go into, but they were all public. But when they started with my group, it was pretty clear that they were looking for a little different paradigm where the focus is maybe certainly you have to be technical, you have to be able to learn quickly, you have to have a good track record and all that kind of stuff. But they really wanted teamwork.
Mhm.
They really wanted people that work together well in a team. And I think that's even more true now, than it was back in 1978, when my group of 35, the first shuttle astronauts were hired. I think it's even more true now. And because there's so many people you have to work with as an astronaut. During the mission, there's all the people in mission control, plus in our case, the Goddard Space Flight Center. We were the top of a very big pyramid. But even more importantly, during training, you interface with so many different people. Scientists that are running experiments on your satellite and so forth on your mission. So all those things have to require good teamwork. You can't be an abrasive a person and work effectively in that environment. Uh, so I said I think that's just continued even more so today.
Yeah, yeah. And they aren't mutually exclusive, as is shown in, in popular culture, there's often a trend. I only can reference people from medicine, but you've seen, House MD and The Good Doctor, and there's
Yeah,
always some
yeah,
weird personality flaw
yeah,
with the high flyers. And yeah, that might be true in like surgery or other things, but it's changing across all professions as well, which is just incredible to see,
yeah.
and very heartening too.
Yeah, I think there's always a room for the strong individual, the Einstein that's going to invent something great, in the future. But more and more as our technology advances, it requires teams of people, to come together, to make the next advance in medicine or space or whatever. You need those interdisciplinary teams.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of teamwork and communication, I wanted to thank the Lehigh Office of Communications for helping kind of organize all this. And
Sure.
I wanted to think about, you went from Lehigh undergrad to NASA to industry back to Lehigh's
Mhm.
faculty. What
Mhm.
does the university look like differently to you now, standing in front of a classroom instead of sitting in one?
Oh my goodness. Back in the 1960s, Lehigh, like a lot of universities our size, was all guys. It was all Lafayette was the same way down the street. It was all guys, and it was dominated by the engineering college. Like two-thirds, or maybe even more, of the students were in the engineering college. The other two colleges, business and arts and science, were very good. They were small and they were kind of overshadowed. So when a few years after I graduated, Lehigh made the decision to go co-ed. So they started admitting women in 1972, and then they at the same time they were going to rebalance so that the three colleges were all about the same size then. Uh, and now we've added a College of Health as well, which is mostly policy. It's a little bit of pre-med, but mostly policy and statistics and that end of medicine there. Yeah, so the school's doubled in size and it's so much more balanced now, with roughly half men and half women, and a good distribution of majors, across the four colleges now. So it's really grown, and we're on a roll now. Lehigh's really doing well, and I'm so happy to see that.
Yes, yes. And so many of my friends from high school actually ended up there. So
Great.
it's even more on the up and up. Yeah. Now, outside of academia and engineering, I was wondering to connect this back to kind of the core themes of our podcast of
Mhm.
science and health sciences. And, what did NASA's physical and psychological screening teach you about human performance under stress that's still
Uh,
underused in business or education today?
Yeah, it's a tough one to get your finger on. I mean, NASA does a fair amount of that. The field of aerospace medicine, is a growing one, and part of that's the psychology, of working in stressful environments and all. And NASA's focused on it even more now, I think, in the future because of the potential for deep space missions with people, going back to the moon, certainly, but then on to Mars. It's not that far away. We know how to do it already. It's just a matter of making up our mind and doing it. But along with that will come really intensive study as to human psychology as you leave the Earth, and how are you going to live on another planet. And it's going to be fascinating, but there will be a lot of stresses. And I think, NASA and the medical people at NASA, I think, will be leading in a way that will help not just the space mission, but as you're suggesting, people under stressful conditions in any kind of business world or search and rescue or fighting fires or whatever. We'll learn a lot about human psychology. And Cameron, I think it's all going to come back to the same thing. Yeah, teamwork. We need each other.
Mhm.
We need to support each other. And the more stressful the situation is, the more important that teamwork, becomes to help relieve the stress or carry the stress, distribute it, across the team. We're capable. We humans are capable of doing such amazing things. It's really remarkable, what we can do when we get our act together and act together, to solve whatever the problems are in the future, climate change or going deep into space. We can solve all those things. There's no question about it. We just have to work together.
Yeah, yeah. And you briefly mentioned Mars, and I know that's a very popular question in the media and pop culture. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to what the future is going to be like. I mean, are we destined for Mars within our lifetimes, or is this something that's a little more far-fetched? What's the science looking like on that?
Yeah, Cameron, we can't help it. We're going there. I mean, people, yeah, ever since that's what made Homo sapien what it is. I mean, we're curious about things. We explore. We're willing to take risks. We like adventure and we like applying technology to make our lives better. All those things are forcing us in that direction. Going back to the moon now, the Artemis missions, it's really just a step. And a lot of scientists actually thought we should skip, going back to the moon. And right after the Obama administration, the decision was made during the Bush administration to retire the space shuttle. When that decision was made, of course, the scientists came in and okay, what's next? And they wanted to go get an asteroid or go to Mars, and much more interesting scientifically than the moon. But I think over time, people said, well, let's figure out how we're going to work to live on the south pole of the moon, which is only 3 days away. Let's figure out how we're going to do that first, because we can go every day, we can come back every day. Mars, 9 months away. It's only every 2 years when the window opens, and you got to come back in another window. So it's a much riskier proposition. So let's figure out how we're gonna do that. But there's no doubt, we're moving in that direction, and hopefully we'll do it as humanity, going back to the moon and then on to Mars. All the nations of the world, participating in it. We can't all go, but we can all share the experience and all. And I think maybe 200 years from now, historians will look back on this time and say, the best thing about the space program is it kind of brought the world together, looking at our planet floating, through space, and understanding what we have to do to make it better.
It's been a while since we've last had that feeling as a society. The pale blue dot.
Yeah,
It's been a while, and we've been living through some divisive times. So I'm hoping that
yeah,
comes sooner rather than later.
yeah. Let's hope.
Yeah, yeah. So, you're still an active flight instructor. What keeps you personally drawn to being behind the controls decades after retiring from the Air Force?
It's the difference between 2D and D. When you're a pilot, you work in three dimensions. You're up in the air, and there's just something about it. It's the allure of flying that makes it very special. So I don't do much of it anymore, frankly. I maintain my licenses and everything and my certificates, so I can train my students in ground school. But I'm not an active, flight instructor anymore. But I do have a partnership in a Piper Nava, twin engine airplane, and my doctor is the lead partner in that, and it's
Wow.
a wonderful way to maintain that contact, with the sport, flying.
Mhm. And you've also kind of a bigger picture kind of ideas as well. You've watched the space race era give way to commercial space era from both the astronaut and the executive seat. What does the Mars era workforce need to look like? And Lehigh's program built to produce it?
Yeah, yeah. I think the technology's been taking off at such a exponential rate. It's hard for academia to keep up. If you look at the one traditional course I teach is control systems, feedback loops, kind of thing, and they're everywhere. They're all through your cars and airplanes and everywhere. There are feedback loops. So the course I teach is the same number as the course I took, almost 60 years ago. And I tell my students in the first day of class, our semesters are 14 weeks long, when we reach the 9 week point in the current course that I teach, that's all I got in 14 weeks, 60 years ago. In other words, there's so much new material in that course that has to be taught. Now the sophomore and junior courses, not so much. I mean, thermodynamics is thermodynamics, fluid dynamics is still fluid dynamics. Those courses look pretty much just like they did 60 years ago. But as you get into your senior level courses, and certainly the aerospace courses and in our graduate courses, you're getting into more than half of that material has been invented in the last 20 years, so
Wow.
it's really a challenge, for us.
Wow.
I think it's the same in medicine,
Yeah.
when you go to
Yeah.
med school, you got to get up to speed, with the technology by the time you graduate.
Oh,
You
yeah.
got 4 years to do it, and they're gonna cram that into you, that 4 years. And so it's a real challenge for education to do it. But we're more and more we're encouraging students to do a fifth year, so hopefully you won't have
Fifth
to
year.
do a fifth year of med school. But right now we're kind of suggesting if you want to do R&D, in aerospace, for
Mhm.
example, you really ought to stay around and do a fifth year and then go to work for NASA.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I actually, funny enough that you said that, I've been preparing for obviously step two, and there's so many new monoclonal antibodies coming out, like
Yeah.
pembrolizumab, abcizimab, all these insane drug therapies that we now have to learn the mechanisms of in medical school. It's so
Yeah.
much worse than they actually have a book thickness graph over
Hmm.
time since 1990 of the step one USMLE step one training books. It's a
Wow.
9 hour exam. And
Hmm.
it's gone from this in 1990 to like this. And it's like this thick now. And
Wow.
it's just like, so
Yeah.
I interviewed the Nobel Prize winner who invented the idea of HLAs. Like he is the king of immunotherapies. And I
Wow.
asked him about some of the basic bare bones immunochemistry drug therapies that we're learning about now. He didn't know any of the medications. And he's the Nobel Prize winner in the field. He didn't know any of that. I'm like, pembrolizumab. He's like, I have no idea what that is. So it's just
Yeah,
like,
it's amazing.
it's
Yeah.
moving too fast. And as soon as I graduate, there are going to be a million more medications that come out. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's,
Well, I think it's natural then. I think in your profession, at some point you got to be a specialist, uh,
yeah.
or the analogy to our systems engineer in the design world, aerospace world, it would be the generalist. The doctor who's the general practitioner, or the internist, maybe, that he's going to make sure that all the other doctors that have their specialties make sure they all come together correctly for that particular patient. Yeah, that could be an increasingly important role in medicine, to have that person that has the general view of your body, that can make those calls between the different kinds of treatments that may be interfering with each other. Who knows? It's a real challenge. Yeah, engineering is so straightforward, compared to medicine. I mean, the human body is so
Oh,
complicated, and everybody's different, and it's a real challenge to medical science.
yeah, yeah. No, that's completely true. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there are, any parallels you've seen in other fields as well, that you could maybe expound upon, because I know that this is a very interdisciplinary podcast. So anything you've
Yeah.
found in other fields that kind of are moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's true everywhere. I mean, some are more staid than others, but even something very traditional and like civil engineering, there are all kinds of new materials coming in for construction and buildings. There's all kinds of new thermodynamics coming in for heat pumps and all. So if you're in an industry that didn't seem to change very much compared to aerospace, it's still changing. The new technologies are dramatic, and a lot of those technologies are going to go into space. We have civil engineers now coming into our department that are doing research on space structures. So they're going to figure out how to make extremely lightweight structures in space. Yeah, so wherever you are, I think things are changing. The rate of change may be a little different. You know, with aerospace tending to be the fastest changing discipline, but certainly all of them are moving in that direction.
Yes, yes. And if you were advising a young engineer choosing between a NASA style institutional career and a SpaceX Blue Origin style commercial one today, what would you tell them to weigh?
Yeah, I have that conversation frequently. I mean, I'd say Lockheed and Northrop and Boeing tend to be the biggest employers of our students, coming out the big companies. And that's a great opportunity to get in with a big company. I did that when I went to work for Bell Laboratories at AT&T.
Hmm.
You get a lot of chance to see the big picture, but you may not have as much responsibility early as you would with a smaller company or a fast-moving company like SpaceX or Blue Origin. Yeah,
Hmm.
so it's a career decision that's probably most students make based on their personality, whether they want to really hit the run with an entrepreneurial kind of company or do something a little bit more with a larger aerospace company. Yeah, and there's no wrong answers there, and it's kind of where you want to start. I've had 7 careers in my life, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to have those opportunities. Whereas, my parents' generation, you were happy to have one job and a pension, for your life, and it's a different world now.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, 7 is cutting it very, very small. I mean, that's very humble of you to say. You know, um, so you've seen satellite technology as well. I mean, speaking of how
Mhm.
things change over time, you've seen it change from Bell Labs power converters to the systems your students are designing now.
Yeah.
What's the biggest technological leap you didn't see coming, and what do you think is the next thing that people are looking forward for in the future?
Yeah, we're going to be putting a lot of new things into space. And Jared Isaacman, who's one of our neighbors here now, he's the head of NASA, was here last fall speaking with our students, an introductory keynote. And yeah, he was a wonderful guy. And he was talking about how NASA, for example, has to really focus on the hard things and all. And some of the hard things he was talking about is designing small nuclear reactors to take into space and to use on the moon and Mars, one day to generate the power needed because we'll need more power than we can probably practically get, from solar panels. Yeah, so this is, one example of something I'd never thought about that even 5 years ago. I never thought about,
Yeah,
nuclear
yeah.
power in space, but yeah, and so many things like that are going to come up, where we're trying to learn how to live in space and extend our humanity to Mars and beyond. We need to be creative and figure out new solutions like that. So it's going to be a wonderful thing to watch, and I have no doubt that we're going to. My closing chart, that I use with my students when they come as freshmen and everything. I review the last 100 years, which is basically the Wright brothers, through today. My last chart is what's the next 100 years going to look like? Can you imagine? And these freshmen coming into Lehigh and our other schools, they're going to have a lot to say about what that 100 years is going to look like. But no one can imagine it now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And then no one can really imagine the future at all. I mean, it's just
Yeah,
coming and coming and coming, and it's just
yeah,
every day there's something new. And it's so unlike, I mean, I have a master's degree in religious studies, and so I've done a lot of work in social sciences and anthropology and looking back in time, especially over the last 100 years, and just the density of news
yeah,
per square, unit of time has been so compressed.
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
we just had the world's first trillionaire, and then the single biggest day loss of a single person in world history.
yeah.
It's just unbelievable to see. So
Yeah, I think the political science challenges are and the psychology, those are going to be just as big as the technical challenges because
yes.
people have to adjust, to evolving cultures, and that adjustment's important, very important.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of wanted to round out the interview with some healthcare focused questions, a little more focused here. Um, NASA's physical screening for astronauts in the 70s was some of the most rigorous health vetting in existence. What did they know
Mhm.
about the human body then that mainstream medicine still hasn't caught on to?
Yeah, I'm not sure. They put us through for a whole week. We went through. They had there were 200 of us that were tested for the 35 that they selected, and we're all very willing guinea pigs. You were doing our very best, and some were physical limitation tests, and others were mental and so forth. So they were accumulating this massive amount of data on all of us, and it was a big research project at NASA. The doctors were using all this for their project. Uh, and I'm not sure what they learned particularly, but what we learned during the missions, though, as we started flying more and more people into space, is that People adjust. I mean, you go up into space the first. I was very sick the first day. I had a brainstem reaction of fear of falling or something. I was very sick the first. I could do my job, but just barely. But we adjust, and we've learned that. Some people go up and. As a fighter pilot, I've never had any motion sickness, but I was sick in space. Other people have had a motion sickness on the ground, have gone up in space, and they're fine. So they're still trying to figure that one out. But
Yeah.
we'll learn a lot about our bodies, by stressing them in space, and the aerospace medicine people will hopefully discover things about that stress that will help us here on Earth.
Mhm.
Osteoporosis. You have bone loss in space. You don't stress the bone cells; they don't grow. So
Oh
I think
yeah.
the crews on the space station now are taking Fosamax, to help retard that bone loss, because apparently it doesn't, recover, when you come back. Radiation in space is going to be a real big problem. How to solve that. Cardiovascular problems with not your heart becoming lazy, and not having to pump against gravity. Yeah, so I think the future is very bright, for this combination of aerospace and medicine, teaching us more, about our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think, well, obviously space flight does do those measurable things to the human body like bone density loss and fluid shifts and vision changes. Did you experience any lasting physical effects from your mission that surprised you years later, or you were totally fine?
No, I was fine. I was only up for a week, Cameron. You said a week, they don't expect much, but I'm still
Yeah.
invited back to Houston every year. They longitudinal study.
Yeah.
For every astronaut, they picked four non-astronauts, the similar height, weight, and age, and they're studying us, through our entire lives. It's a big, huge study, and but they're not seeing anything at one week. I think when you get to about 3 months, that's when the bone loss becomes measurable. They usually X-ray the heel of your bone when you get the bone on your heel when you get back, and there's some vision problems you were alluding to that they've seen more recently on the space station. But I think the hardest one though, once we leave low Earth orbit, is the radiation problem.
Hmm.
When the sun's at its peak activity, it won't cause you illness during your mission, but boy, they're worried about it, the accumulation over time. So they're trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to shield astronauts on the moon and go to Mars.
And what did NASA's approach to monitoring astronaut health in orbit teach you about preventative versus reactive medicine?
Oh, always preventative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to be a doctor to realize that. You just have to be an engineer. When things are, have to oil the gears, right? You have to take care of your machinery, and so engineers are key to that to start with. And I've always been that way. I'm very lucky. Medical science. I have 6 joint replacements.
Wow.
I'm a cancer survivor. I had stage 3B Hodgkin's disease when I was 40. Right after I came back from NASA, I came down with a bad case of Hodgkin's, and I got
Oh,
through 7 months of chemo.
so
My
sorry.
my lenses in my eyes are replaced. I got modern high-tech lenses. I've got hearing aids. So some modern medicine technology has kept me here and teaching at Lehigh, where I otherwise would not have been able to. You
God
know.
bless modern medicine for that. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
oh my
feel the same way.
goodness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you flew fighters for years before going to space. How did the Air Force's approach to pilot health and G-force tolerance compare to what NASA required of astronauts?
Yeah, a little looser in the Air Force. NASA's much more strict, in terms of physical, annual physical and your performance and so forth. The Air Force is, they watch everybody and all, of course, but it's not quite as strict, and the physicals are not quite as demanding as NASA's. But there's a focus on it, and the G forces have been an issue. We've lost pilots in the F-16 pulling too many Gs, and it's interesting. They in that airplane, it was the first time the airplanes I flew were so-called third generation, where if you
Mhm.
tried to pull too many Gs, the airplane would slow down too much. You didn't have enough power to do it for more than 5 or 10 seconds. But starting with the F-16, it was a different game. The airplane could perform beyond the human's capability. So they tilted the seat back to get the brain a little closer to the heart level, so you didn't black out. but right away then they found that the guys were going out and being real aggressive, and gals too, lady fighter pilots in that era. They were pulling so many G's they were tearing their heart sac. Yeah, so yeah, so they're yeah, so they kind of learned to back off, and not much need for that anymore because most of these fighters are really platforms for launching missiles. You don't get into the dogfight kind of environment so much anymore. Let the missile do the work. So it's changing a little bit in that regard, but we have to be careful because the machines are definitely could hurt your body anymore.
Yeah, and we always learn about how it can not only tear your heart sac, but it can tear your aorta. I mean, there can be like serious
Yeah,
complications there.
yeah, you don't want a dissection there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the classic case in medical board exams is a car crash, but it's a little less extreme than a fighter plane. But
Yeah.
um, and you is there a pilot's mentality toward physical health, like treating your body like
Yeah.
equipment that needs maintenance that you think civilians could benefit from? Any message to civilians out there?
Yeah, and I think pilots, particularly commercial pilots, where their job depends on their next flight physical, they're really focused on their health, and astronauts, the same way. The kind of the difference between the way commercial pilots treat the doctors, they kind of want to keep them at arm's length because
Yeah.
when you go for your physical, only two things can happen, and one of them is very bad. You get grounded. At NASA, we had some people like that, but most of us embraced the doctors because we're part of the research program. We wanted them to understand our bodies and what changed when we go into space. So we were very much open kimono, with the medical staff there at NASA.
Hmm.
Whereas in the private aviation world, commercial aviation world, not so much. They don't want to be part of an experiment. They just want to
Yeah.
keep their job. Yeah. So, but I think the psychology is the same in both cases. You want to take care of yourself, and there aren't too many people smoking and doing all those kind of bad things.
No,
Um,
no. Yeah.
yeah.
And these high stress environments like combat flying and orbital repair missions put enormous cognitive load on a person. What did you
Mhm.
learn about managing stress physiologically, not just mentally in those moments?
Yeah, it kind of starts in the like 6 months before mission. I mean, you're in training. We were in training for 2 years. It was a very complicated mission, but that last 6 months, it really starts to ramp up. Yeah. So we had a saying at NASA. We have to go. We have to an even strain. In other words, don't get too high and don't get too low. Try to maintain your homeostasis. I guess the doctors would say, to maintain your balance going in when all these things are happening real fast all around you. Stay calm. You know who was the best of that of any astronaut ever?
Ooh,
Neil Armstrong.
that'll do it. That'll do it.
He was the yeah, if you have a minute for a story, there's a story other astronauts have told, but Al Bean told me because
Hmm.
uh, he knew Armstrong real well. And so Armstrong was flying this thing that was a simulated lander that had motors on it, kind of like a quad rotor, and he was flying it out the field there out at Ellington, 5 miles from the Space Center, and he lost control and it went sideways and he ejected sideways like this and barely survived. The thing crashed. His chute deployed and bang, he was on the ground. I mean, he barely survived.
Oh
So,
my goodness.
so, uh, so Al's in his office when this happens at the Space Center, and the phone rings, and he picks it up, and he said, Armstrong just crashed the lunar trainer, and Al looked out his door, and in the hallway in the astronaut office, here comes Neil Armstrong. Uh, he 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 crashed. He picked up his parachute. He walked to his car. He put his parachute in the back of the car. He drove to the Space Center and he started filling out the accident report. It was,
Are you
like,
kidding?
yeah, that's a true story.
Wow.
He was just like the coolest guy. And he had a chance. He had all kinds of things go wrong on Gemini. They almost got killed on the Gemini mission.
Oh my.
He had problems with X-15 as a test pilot. And he could handle all those things. He just maintained maintain his calm and his needed, in the situation. So he was the epitome of the cool hand Luke astronaut.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, I mean that's incredible. And speaking of, crashes and things happening in stories, I was thinking about all the things that happen to astronauts, and one thing is sleep deprivation. That's common both in orbits and in fields like healthcare, where,
Mm.
I'm speaking with surgery residents and they're sleeping about 14, 15 hours a week.
Oh,
So it's
that's
it's
not good.
it's really intense. Um,
Yeah.
what did NASA teach you about performing at an extremely high level when you're not fully rested?
Yeah, we try to avoid that situation, and really in space, they give you plenty of time off. And boy, when you're weightless, it's easy to sleep. It's like the ultimate waterbed. You kind of float like that. It's really wonderful. I woke up in the morning. Whose hands are those in front of me? You know, yeah, it's just very restful. So I think most astronauts will tell you you only need about 4 hours really of good sleep in space. Yeah. And but NASA would always give us the full 8 hour time, but we'd spend the rest of the time looking out the window, when they weren't scheduling us to do something, yeah. So, but I think the whole idea of managing stress, though, is something NASA is focused on, and it'll become, like we talked about earlier, increasingly important as we start to leave the Earth.
Sure, sure. And, satellite systems and the human body both rely on redundancy to survive failure. It's not just, figuring out how much time to sleep, but if something
Yeah.
fails, two kidneys, two hands, two everything, two eyes, two nostrils, engineers build backups for backups as well. Do you think healthcare as a system builds in enough redundancy for when things go wrong?
Yeah, I'm not knowledgeable enough to know for sure, but we on our crew, we everybody could do all jobs were backed up. Like I was the camera operator for IMAX. Bob Crippen, our commander, backed up me up on that. He also backed me up on the mechanical arm.
Hmm.
The spacewalkers backed each other up. Dick Scobie backed up Crippen for landing. So that kind of backup is built into the system at NASA when they train crews. And so you have, the system backup, hardware, software, all is backing up, and then the crew is all backed up. And then you have alternate mission control backups and so forth. And I'm not sure in the medical profession how much that's done like in the operating room if well, all of a sudden a doctor doesn't feel too good whether someone's prepared to take over or not. But
Yeah.
that probably doesn't happen very often. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then, as someone who's spent, a career also kind of for the future generation, your outreach work encourages kids to pursue STEM. Do you
Mm.
see health and medical technology as an increasingly aerospace adjacent field for the next generation of engineers?
Mm. Yeah, no, I think the whole biomedicine thing, and in our department, we do a lot of bio research on the stresses on bones and joints coming together. One of our faculty does research in that area of bone growth into metals. But then we have a whole department of bioengineering, which is at the cellular level as well as at the more clinical level. So there's a lot going on at marrying engineering, with medical science.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And, I wanted to know, kind of as parting thoughts, do you have any advice for our audience of students and medical trainees and engineering, early career professionals? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, study broadly and try to learn as much as you can. I mean, at some point, like we talked about earlier, if you're in the medical world and you're a doctor, you're probably going to be specializing in something, But try to maintain that broad perspective and include that sense of teamwork that we talked about earlier as well. Be part of whether it's in the operating room or just running the administration of the hospital. You have to think about how to do your part to make the whole mission succeed as best as possible.
Yeah, yeah. No, I very much appreciate all of the advice that you've given, all the stories that you've shared. I mean, what an honor and a privilege it is to have had you.
Oh,
Um,
it was fun. I really enjoyed meeting you, Cameron. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I'll let you have the last word if you have anything final to say as well.
No, I think we covered everything there, but I do appreciate the opportunity to talk and it's my job this day to try to help the youngsters coming along, whether in med school or going off into Mars in the future,
Yes, yes,
to learn
absolutely.
the lessons of the past and not repeat our problems. Do better.
No, no, no. You're too humble. I mean, you guys laid the stage. So I
Good.
very much appreciate all that you've done for our generation, for your generation, to inspire everyone the world over to
Great.
look up to the stars.
Yeah. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you very much. This is Cameron
Bye-bye.
Sabet signing off.